Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are back once again to talk all things college basketball. That's right, we're here on the Thursday show. That means we are touching on all things across the sport. But there's one thing that's really dominating headlines, that's going to dominate the conversation here in this first segment. Charles Bediako has received a preliminary injunction which could have him eligible to play at Alabama. We're going to dive into the details, how we got here, what went wrong. The NCAA has weighed in, the University of Alabama's thoughts, all of it. We're going to try to touch on every last piece that we can here in this first segment. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but got to finish out the rest of today's lineup because in the second segment, we are going to walk through some of the big shifts that we've seen in the past couple of weeks. We talked last week about some of the undefeated teams remaining and when they could take their first loss. Interesting developments at the top of bracketology, interesting developments on the bubble, which is why in the third segment, we're going to take a couple of questions that I've gotten across the sport, answer those, and then get you out of here with the games of the week as we always do. But like I said, I would love to talk about the games that have gone on, and we'll do that some in the second segment. But what has dominated the headlines, the place that we have to start and finish our conversations right now, are this Charles Bediako story. He was granted a preliminary injunction after news came out that he was seeking one in an Alabama courtroom on Tuesday. On Wednesday, he receives the preliminary injunction, which gives him 1 week approximately to play before this goes back into a courtroom, before there are more conversations about his future and his eligibility in the NCAA. That date is January 27th that they have until. So we know for sure that barring something drastic, barring some type of intervention that is above the heads of the NCAA, would have to be above the head of this Alabama courtroom, which then implies that it would have to take the federal government stepping in now, which is something that college athletics has been asking from Congress to weigh in on this. But I'm not sure even then that they could get this done, get this far enough down the line within the time window needed to prevent him from stepping on the court against Tennessee. So let's talk about Charles Bediako. 2 seasons at Alabama. He has not been there in 3 years. Finished out his time in 2023 when Alabama had a really solid team under Nate Oates. Bediako was a big piece of that. Now, the numbers are not going to just jump off the page and make you think, wow, this guy was a dominant force. 6 points about per game, a solid rebounder, but nothing super flashy. Played just over 20 minutes per game. But there is no doubt, if you go back and listen to the podcasts around that time, you start reading about that Alabama team at that time, Charles Bediako's growth and development into a consistent and strong starting center is what really helped propel that team. Yes, they had some star power in the backcourt, some scoring punch that really kind of sealed the deal there, but his ability to come in and provide the consistency on offense and defense that they needed to be a solid rebounder and a strong interior defender, that really helped them down the stretch. And it's why Charles Bediako decided to enter the NBA draft. Now, it was a controversial move for him to enter the NBA draft when he did that. I personally did not think that he was quite ready for that. Thought that 1 more year in college would definitely be a benefit for him. But he chooses, the Canada native, to go ahead and make that leap. Unfortunately for him, he goes undrafted, and I think that's an interesting piece of this. But he does end up signing with the Spurs. He has now played in the G League on multiple occasions. He has signed, and this is a difference with James Najee, the Baylor center who we have talked about in recent weeks, and his eligibility. There's two really key differences that I want to hone in on here. The first one is that James Najee, while he was drafted, yes, he did not sign an NBA contract to play for an organization within the United States. Charles Bediako, undrafted, but did sign a contract with a team on a two-way deal. Also signed an Exhibit 10 deal, which is, we can get into the minutia of different NBA contracts. He has not signed to a regular NBA roster. So I'm sure that his lawyers and many lawyers who have clients with similar cases are going to argue right along those same lines that it is not an NBA contract. He signed a two-way contract, which is part-time in the G League, part-time in the NBA, but it is not a full standard NBA deal. So he was not a full NBA player. That's really murky. I still would lean that a two-way contract in particular is a NBA contract. Now, if you wanted to tell me that the Exhibit 10, that shouldn't really count, I could actually get behind that because the Exhibit 10 is really a roster maneuver that these teams use to get guys a little bit of extra money, to reward them for signing early and agreeing to go to their G League affiliate. An Exhibit 10 contract is usually signed during the offseason with a player who is not going to make the main roster, but you want him in training camp, whether you need extra bodies there for the practices that you're going to be running, or you do genuinely want a good look at him. Maybe you have an open roster spot that you would be interested in using on one of these guys as they battle it out. But your two-way spots are filled, so you want to get him on an Exhibit 10 so that you can continue to look at him, continue to evaluate his talent. But what generally happens is they're waived and assigned to the G League roster. And so it carries a higher dollar value than a standard G League contract. And so they get that signing bonus for being on the Exhibit 10 deal, but are still playing in the G League. That's an interesting case for me that you could break down. But here's the big difference between those two players when we talk about James Najee, when we talk about Charles Bediako. Now, I said at the time, this is very important, James Najee had to be where the NCAA put their foot down because they had every recourse to do so. If they turn down James Najee from returning, now they have let in a handful of these G League players. But again, that was an isolated moment in time where this is a select few. I would say probably less than 15 in total that this has ever been the case for, that would ever qualify for this. Where the G League Ignite program folding, coupled with the creation of a G League team in Mexico, which the NBA wanted to promote and get international players into, created this window in this pocket of a couple of handfuls. It's not like this was a massive deal, but you had these few players, Thierry Darlin being one of them, now playing in the West Coast Conference. He was kind of the first one and kind of the pioneering example of this, where, yes, he had played quote unquote professionally in the G League, but his path was much more similar to those who were coming over from Europe for years now, who were playing on youth teams or under a certain level or with a certain level of experience, time spent with the main roster. The G League Ignite was a program meant to be a substitute for your freshman year of college and for your senior year of high school in some cases. That was the interesting dilemma that popped up, is that when the G League Ignite program folded, players like London Johnson, players like Dink Pate, they got left out to dry where they were supposed to be graduating high school and then entering one season or one at the college level, but instead went to the G League Ignite, spent their high school senior season, and then were supposed to spend their freshman year in college with that program as their second year before they could enter the NBA draft. So they were not NBA draft eligible. That's so important here. These players were not eligible to go to the draft. And so at that time, the NCAA should have opened a window to allow specifically those players, just the few included in there. It would have been less than 5 if they had just opened this window for those players to enter college basketball in what would have been their freshman season. This all could have been avoided. But again, the NCAA is behind the 8 ball. They continue to only react. They never are proactive with these things. And again, it happens here because we talk about the Darlin case and how that comes up, how that impacts now these other G League players who are international. Again, they have a decent case to be made. If you're going to allow in these other international players, I don't see why you wouldn't those G League players. So they get in. When James Najee comes knocking at the door, he was drafted. He went through the NBA draft process. That is the absolute most important detail here. Because at that point, the NCAA's recourse and their reasoning, if they want to challenge this legally, is that the NCAA has had a long relationship with the NBA, which states that once a player declares, not even is drafted by, declares for the NBA draft, they are no longer eligible to play college basketball, regardless of it being the international deadline or the college deadline. Because there had not been players until this season who stayed in to the international deadline, past the international deadline, and then come back and join the college game. So if they had put their foot down, they could have fought it and they would have won, I believe, because not only do they have a case there that has nothing to do with their rules, the NBA does not allow you to go back either. That rule is shared between the NBA and the NCAA. So the NBA has every reason to back you in that situation to prevent this player from going back because they don't want to lose their G League talent pool back into the college ranks and dilute what has become an important part of their business model, the G League, especially with the NBA trying to start up a European league as well. The NBA had every reason in the world to back the NCAA and say, no, James Najee cannot play there. If he wants to play in the G League, if he wants to play in NBA Europe, he can do those things, but he cannot go back to the NCAA. But they didn't fight that battle. They said, well, he's still an international prospect. Let's just let that one go. That leads you to Charles Bediako. Charles Bediako comes in and argues, I have not played an NBA game, which is true. The difference here is that he stayed in past the collegiate deadline. Now, here's the problem that the NCAA is going to face as it tries to fight this legally. It's an arbitrary deadline. If the NCAA is in violation of antitrust laws, if the NCAA is saying that because you were at an NCAA institution, you are restricted more so than an international player who went through, got drafted, and then came back, that's not going to go well. Because the whole point of all of this is that the NCAA cannot just tell these kids what to do without them being involved in that process. And that's what this is going to come down to. Because you didn't fight the James Najee case, what is the difference? If you can stay past the international deadline, why can't you stay past the college deadline? What other than it's an NCAA rule do you have to hold that up? Because if you had gone with the NBA's rule as the mandate, that is a collectively bargained rule that can be enforced. You can't enforce NCAA rules. We have proven that over and over and over again in court. And so the NCAA, from every indication, is going to dig in and fight this. They are going to try to uphold their rules. I think it's going to be much harder because of all the steps they didn't take along the way. All the missteps that they had in this process have made it so that Charles Bediako can go into a courtroom with a group of high-powered lawyers who have beaten the NCAA over and over and over again in these cases. Look at how many players have gotten additional eligibility with this group of lawyers. Look at the amount who have gotten some sort of money in return from the NCAA with these lawyers. The NCAA's track record in court is terrible. And so for them to allow it to get to this point is just more proof that they are not capable of handling things right now. It's going to be interesting to see, though, because they will fight it and it could get ugly. What does that mean for Alabama as they've received permission from a judge to play Charles Bediako? A court case is not going to be resolved by the end of March Madness if this goes to a full-scale trial. And more so, he would be out of eligibility under, again, these arbitrary set of rules, his 5-year clock, which is not even the standard right now. So I'm not sure why people are pointing to that. I get that it is a metric at least to argue that he wouldn't be in this long term, but it's very difficult to know exactly where this thing is headed and whether there would be any recourse by Tennessee this weekend, by the NCAA. Would they, if Alabama goes on to win the national championship with Charles Bediako, would they take down the banner if later down the line they fix this rule? There's so much to unpack here and such a confusing road forward because we don't know the rules, because the rules are not enforceable. They have to collectively bargain something. I know that they are calling for Congress to step in. Again, that's not going to be done by Saturday. And if it gets done, then what? Do you strip everything that happened for Alabama with Charles Bediako on the roster? They found themselves in a complete mess once again. I do want to read a couple of the statements and then also touch on, before we move to the next segment, on the statement from Alabama, the statement from the NCAA, and then have a quick discussion about Nate Oates and his role in this as well. Of course, Alabama released a statement about Charles Bediako saying the University of Alabama supports Charles and his ongoing efforts to be reinstated for competition while he works to complete his degree. So they're going to make this, he just wants to come back to college and finish his degree, guys. And that's another interesting part of this, is that many of these schools, this is not something that's talked about almost at all, which is so funny when you hear the term student athlete, and I always put that in quotations because it's ridiculous. This has never been the case. They've been treated as athletes. And here's a perfect example why. Many schools, I don't believe it's mandated, but I know that many of them, when a player leaves early, and you hear fans, or heard this particularly years ago when you would talk about whether it was players entering the draft early or players who wanted to be paid, they would say the value of an education. And he left early, so he didn't get that. That's his fault. Well, there are schools that will allow the player If he goes to the draft in college basketball after 1 year for the one and dones, after football, it'd be after 3 years. And it would apply to the basketball players as well beyond 1 year. But there are schools that will allow that player to come back and finish their degree whenever they choose to, not to re-enroll and pay for it, but it's included. Part of your deal to come play basketball here is that you get to complete your education here. So there are players who in the NBA will continue with online courses, go during the off season, that will do various things to complete their degrees. Some will go after their careers are over. Not everyone will capitalize on it, but it's a real thing that happens out there. And so it's an interesting piece to include in here because I think that the lawyers are going to try to use that. If he is allowed, the NCAA is the one who labels them student athletes. They chose that label. And if student really is supposed to come first here, well, if he's still eligible to enroll in classes under that same scholarship, he should then be eligible to play basketball under that same scholarship. That's a hard argument to fight against if you're the NCAA. So, again, there's a lot to unfold here, but the NCAA did respond with a statement saying these attempts to sidestep NCAA rules and recruit individuals who have finished their time in college or signed NBA contracts are taking away opportunities from high school students. A judge ordered the NCAA let a former NBA player take the court Saturday against actual college student athletes is exactly why Congress must step in and empower college sports to enforce our eligibility rules. Again, that's great. Except that Charles Bediako is the same age as some of the other guys out there. So, I don't know. You've also got the fact that, again, the point to take away opportunities from a high school student. And that leads us into this next part. Because Nate Oates, when the James Najee situation came up, spoke about how it was taking away opportunities from high school athletes. Now, is it definitely going to come back to bite him that he then immediately goes out and finds a center of his own on the free agent market? Yeah, it's a bad look. There's no way around it. Bad look for Nate Oates, bad look for Alabama, bad look for college basketball as a whole, everyone involved, just like the name James Najee one was. But if he's going to justify it to himself, justify it to his fan base, it's pretty simple. He didn't take away any opportunity from a high school athlete. Charles Bediako is going to be here from the late January until, hopefully for them, early April. There's no way that a high school athlete could pop up and play for this team during that time period. So adding a player midway through the season, who does that take an opportunity away from? He can argue that. And I think it's another one of these really strange, convoluted arguments. I think it's really bizarre that we're in an era where we're adding meaningful rotation players to the roster midway through the year. But at the same time, if you're a coach and it's available, I get these conversations about don't be a hypocrite. I agree. Here's the thing. Most coaches should have just stayed quiet about a lot of these other things and worked in the back rooms and complained behind the scenes or off the record. Getting in front of a microphone and complaining about what other people did that was within the rules is never going to go over well, because we saw it when the transfer portal first opened. Plenty of coaches, I would never do that. Well, now it's how you build a team. One and done back in the day was controversial. No, you have to build and develop guys over time. There's different ways to build a roster, and you're probably going to use them because your goal is to win it all. So while it's really a bad idea to go out there and criticize what other coaches are doing. It's also your job to do whatever you can in order to win. And we know that many coaches throughout the history of college sports have gone well outside the boundaries of legality to do that. So if you can do something that's within the boundaries of legality, it's hard to really hammer the coach outside of the hypocrisy aspect of this thing. I'm sure there will be a lot more conversation about this. I'm sure next week we will be talking about whether or not he's still eligible to play college basketball. There's so much more to unfold in this Charles Bediako story. But on the other side, we are going to talk about some actual college basketball results. We're going to talk about stuff going on the hardwood right here on Three True Values. Welcome back in here as we keep rolling through today's show. Want to talk about some actual on the court basketball now. I know that we were real heavy in that first segment into the weeds of what's wrong with college basketball, of the business side of everything, what's going on off the floor. But here on the show, we do like to talk a lot about the results and what we have seen across the country. And last night, Wednesday night, I thought we got a great story starting to develop here. USC plays Alijah Arenas for the first time this season, back from a pretty severe injury in the preseason. Looked like it was going to hold him out, if not for the full season, at least for most of it. He has tracked well here. This was kind of the front end, I believe, of his recovery window. To be back in January is incredible for a kid who's been through, well, a lot over the last year. You can just go back, and I've talked about him. The whirlwind of coming in as a five-star recruit to USC, uh, reclassifying, big expectations, a 6'6" guard coming into the mix. What can he provide? Can he take this team to the next level? Well, he deals with family issues off the court. His father in all kinds of headlines, legal trouble. At one point, he has a terrifying car crash that not only lucky to escape with minimal injuries, but also with his life, the way that that all unfolded. We've talked about that here on the show as well, but now back on the basketball floor after another injury set him back again further from all of that. Great to see him out on the floor. It was not the debut he would have wanted, that I'm sure USC would have wanted, but it's clear that there's a lot of rust there. I mean, because of multiple circumstances, he has not played a lot of basketball over the past 12 months. He comes out, shoots 3 for 15, does play 29 minutes, which I think is encouraging because that means that at least his stamina is up there. He can get up and down the court. There's not a concern that he won't be able to be in the mix and make an impact. Unfortunately, though, 3 for 15, he did not shoot the ball efficiently. I don't think that's necessarily just who he is as a player by any means, but we'll see how efficient he can become as he keeps working himself not just into basketball shape. That's going to be important, getting his legs under him on these shots. 0 for 6 from 3, clearly just doesn't have his legs. More proof of that is 2 for 6 from the free throw line. He clearly just does not have the rhythm that you need playing basketball. He has not been on the court very often, like I said, in recent memory. But the 29 minutes is encouraging. He finishes with 2 rebounds and 2 assists as well. Only 1 turnover, which is, I think, impressive for a guy who played 30 minutes and was struggling with inefficiency shooting, to go out there and not force it with bad turnovers. I think that's another encouraging sign for a guy who's going to play on the ball quite a bit throughout his time in college and potentially at the next level as well. So, plenty to work on. I'm not by any means saying that this is an incredible debut. After all, they lose to Northwestern. I think it's a really interesting time in the schedule to work him in too. If you're Eric Musselman coming off of a game where he had a lot of frustrations. He talked about not only the officiating, but his players as well, and getting the most out of the guys who want to go out there, who are going to contribute the effort needed to win games in a 5 point loss against Purdue. Well, now you face Northwestern and you give a debut to a kid who is not in basketball shape, has not been in the mix here recently. And I get it's the Big Ten schedule. This might have been the softest opening that you could have provided him, given what is ahead. You look Wisconsin and Iowa the next two games up. So you're talking about pushing his debut almost 2 weeks if you want to get any kind of level of competition that might be easier to work your way into than Northwestern. I don't know if that would be worth it because, again, basketball shape is something you get in games. You get your legs under you, yes, at practice, reps and reps and reps, but also you just can't replicate that intensity, that live action, especially for a freshman who this is his first time in this environment, in that big of an arena, playing in front of that many people. It's all new. It's all an adjustment period, regardless, without having to pile on everything else in this story. So, interesting point in the calendar for Musselman to bring him in. I think that it can pay big dividends. This is a team that is on the bubble right now, currently in the last four in of bracketology, which updated this morning at On3. Go check that out. But I think that we're sitting at a point very interesting with them on the bubble, and this guy gives them a lot of upward trajectory. So I get why Musselman brings him into the mix here. I get why he's also calling for his players to offer more across the board. Elsewhere across college basketball, kind of just in the headlines, things that I was really interested to watch. I think that you can't go much further without talking about how dominant these top tier Big Ten teams are. Really, I've said that I think the Big 12 is the best conference in college basketball this year. And I'm not ready to come off of that. And if you look at the net rankings, it's actually the SEC, which has the highest average. So if you look at across the board, all the teams in the mix, the SEC has the highest average ranking for their teams, but they don't have any of those top end teams. You look at the top two seed lines in bracketology, not an SEC team in sight. So I can't rule them the best conference in college basketball. They might be the um, toughest schedule, maybe, if you just want to go night in, night out. But I don't even know about that because you don't, again, have any stretch where you're going to face two, three in a row, one seed candidates. So I look at this Big Ten and I say, Nebraska still undefeated, atop the conference standings, 8-0 in the conference, 19-0 overall. Really impressive stuff. And number 7 in the country. Michigan, 7-1 in the conference, 17-1 overall. Still the number 1 seed in bracketology, despite having one loss on their resume. They've held off an undefeated Arizona team with how strong their metrics are, how big of a margin they've beaten some of these top teams by. You've got another team up in the top 5 of the standings as well in Purdue. Again, 17-2, just took a loss against UCLA. They could be even higher if it weren't for that. Michigan State inside the top 10, 17-2 overall, 7-1 in the conference. This is an absolute gauntlet at the top of this conference. Illinois, number 11, they're also 7-1 in the conference, 16-3 overall, and really surging on an 8-game win streak at this point. Michigan State on a 5-game win streak currently as well. So when these Giants face off down the stretch of this Big Ten conference, it's going to be must-watch TV. You will have to tune in. I think that they have everyone in that tier, really, all can be classified as national championship contenders. And we will be talking about here in a week or two the national championship contenders. That will be what we focus on during the show is how do we narrow things down? Who can we rule out? Who fits the build of a national championship contender? Who's left in the mix? Who we think can get it done at the end of the season? But then in a really interesting kind of tier jump, there's not really a second tier in this conference. You might throw Iowa in there. You might throw in, uh, really, I think that Iowa is kind of the only team you would throw into the second tier here as I look at it, because the bubble teams are kind of the next group here. You look at your Wisconsins, Ohio States, UCLA. I mentioned Iowa might be just above this tier. USC in this mix, Indiana here as well. Like, that's a lot of bubble teams. Washington, well on the wrong side. I think Minnesota, well on the wrong side right now. They would have to do a lot of work. And I think it's just going to be too tough against that top tier when there's five teams at the top of this conference who feel like almost untouchable to the rest of the conference. I think it's going to be really tough for teams to break into that mix. But that bubble tier is really strong. And I'm going to be really interested to see how, when this conference is evaluated, I think they will get the most teams in the field. I think they're looking at double digits here. Obviously, barring some kind of setback where one of these teams that I just mentioned on the bubble continues to takes losses primarily to the teams below this tier, which would include the Minnesotas, Washingtons, Oregon in that mix, Northwestern, who just got a big win that we talked about earlier, Maryland, Penn State, Rutgers in there as well. If you lose to those teams, you're putting yourself at risk of missing the NCAA tournament. I don't think if you lose to any of those top five teams, it's really dinging your resume in any significant way, though. So it's going to be, in terms of the jockeying for position, how do these teams face off against each other? What does that mean for their overall standing? Where do they sit in all the analytics? I think it's looking pretty good. I think that right now they're set up for double-digit bids into the NCAA tournament. We will see how high it can climb. I think it can go as high as probably 11 would be the most I see them getting into the field at once. But again, that would take them all kind of running the slate against these further down the pecking order teams in the Big Ten Conference. When we come back on the other side, going to answer a couple of mailbag questions and we'll get you out of here with the games of the week as we do each and every week right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in here as we wrap up today's episode of 3 True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are opening the mailbag. Only have time to get to 2 here today because really had to narrow them down based on how good and in depth these 2 first questions really were going to be. I decided it was better to spend a little bit of time on each than try to condense them and then also spend time on a third topic. So, the first question, which was brought to me, what's wrong with Auburn? And I thought it was a really interesting question because this is coming from an Auburn fan who really kind of lives and dies with the results. And so for me, as someone who's kind of evaluating bracketology, keeping tabs on everything across the country, I'm watching Auburn and I'm thinking, okay, first year under Stephen Pearl, late ad as the head coach. He's really learning on the fly here. Everything about this program, he is figuring out how to be a head coach in real time. We're watching it unfold. There was no offseason where, oh, I need to handle this differently with players. Oh, during practice, I need to run this a little bit different. Hey, let's go ahead and adjust this. Let's meet as assistant coaches together, figure this out. No, this is really coming on the fly. He had a preseason, like a ramp up period, and now is coaching basketball. So I don't think that it's much of a surprise that we've seen ups and downs from Auburn. Obviously, playing some of the top teams in the country very close at times during this season, but also having some head scratching losses, some head scratching close results throughout the course of the year, too. And so they find themselves right now on the right side of the bubble. I don't think that they're right now 1, even 2 losses away from dipping outside of the NCAA tournament field. And so I think that that's a pretty good spot to have them if you're Stephen Pearl here in year 1. This team was obviously not going to be last year's team. You lose Dylan Cardwell. You lose Janai Broom. You lose a lot of the guard depth that you had as well there. But really, losing Janai Broom on its own was going to be a big change for this Auburn team, which went out and they did restock. But you look across the roster, and what Auburn needed more than anything else in order to have a big year was a jump from Todd Pettiford. That was going to be the most important piece of their team. Todd Pettiford, this team was really built around him. And rather than take a leap forward, we have seen offseason issues which have entered the mix. You've heard Stephen Pearl talk about some of the discipline issues that he has had, not just from Todd Pettiford, but across particularly that guard room. There's a reason that they have a walk-on player in the rotation, and it's not just based off of talent alone. So very interesting how he is handling some of this in real time. It's only natural, I think. Now, you obviously would prefer not to have one of your top rated freshmen on the scout team right now instead of contributing in games. That goes without saying. But I think that Pearl is handling it well. I think that now is the time when you are elevated, particularly as the son of the outgoing head coach, elevated into the full-time head coach position just before the season starts. We already have dealt with a lot of the nepotism cries. We've dealt with the did he earn this job debates. Now we're past that, and he's coaching basketball, and he's got this team in the NCAA tournament picture. I think it's only natural that in some way, somewhere across that lineup, when you have 15 plus players listening to a coach who used to be their assistant coach and now is calling the shots, it was only natural that someone in that locker room was going to challenge some level of authority, was going to push some kind of boundary. And I think that Stephen Pearl has responded to it very well to this point. Now, he's still got a long ways to go in game adjustments, real game situations that you can think about all you want on a whiteboard. But when it comes time to draw up that play, when it comes time to make that substitution, it's all gut feeling. It's all on the fly. You have one split second to make that decision. And I think that he's continuing to grow into it. So what's wrong with Auburn is that they were set up to fail this season. You're coming off of one of the great seasons in program history. You then say goodbye to a Hall of Fame coach at the last second before this season starts. You insert a first-time head coach. You have a star player who this whole team was built around, who has not lived up to the billing to this point. And so, yes, there have been struggles. It's not what you would want it to be if you're an Auburn fan. But I don't think that it's time to sound the alarm by any means. Now, if this Auburn team, with the talent that they have, with the money that was spent on this group, if they were outside of the NCAA tournament picture entirely, I would start to say, we need to think about whether this was the right hire, whether this was the right decision. But to have them in the NCAA tournament field, to have them, like I said, in the mix against some of the top teams in the country, he's gotten them up for some of the big games. It's about consistency. It's about him continuing to learn as a head coach, them continuing to learn what he likes as a head coach. And I think we've seen some of that growth, if not in the results on the court, in the approach that they take to this season. So I'm continuing to track Auburn, continuing to watch how Stephen Pearl develops as a coach. I think it'll be really interesting to see when we get to the postseason. That's where I really want to see what kind of decision-making can he unpack. Where does he go when things get tight in the SEC tournament? When they make it to the NCAA tournament, what decisions does he make? How does he handle some of those unique situations that pop up around that time of year? So don't hit the panic button, Auburn fans. Your coach is still learning. I'm not here to tell you that he will be a great success or that he will end up even seeing out the full length of his contract. I'm also not going to tell you that you need to be rounding up the candidates this offseason. I don't think that's the case. I think he's shown you plenty over this year to show you that he deserves the shot to keep building this and show what he can do with a full offseason as the head coach, go into a season with his team rather than his father's team. Second question here: is Kentucky better without, and I just put the stars because Jalen Lowe and Jaden Quaintance have both been brought up to me separately, interestingly enough, in this conversation. And I think it's a little bit of a false um, representation. I don't think that Kentucky is necessarily better without Jalen Lowe. We'll start there. They could use some point guard minutes. I think that that's been an issue when he's been out, is fans crying for, other than Denzel Aberdeen, who's really more of a combo guard, who can dribble the ball. I mean, Jasper Johnson is a shooting guard. He is not a point guard, but he's having to handle some of the backup point guard duties. You're having to see some of the wings bring the ball up the floor when there's not pressure up on them. So I think that he would add plenty to this team. Now, there's no denying that when he has come into the roster, come into the rotation, and then exited again, and then come back in, it has led to a roller coaster of results. Somewhat bad when he's on the floor. That's just natural. That's what happens when a player returns from injury and has to enter the mix of teammates who have finally gotten some kind of chemistry. And I think that's been the biggest issue that Kentucky has faced. Outside of the pressure that was inherently put on themselves, outside of the strange sky is falling attitude that seemed to be emerging during the non-conference portion of the schedule from within the locker room, not from the fan base even. Like, I get the fan base. That's Big Blue Nation. That's going to happen. But the team did not respond positively to it. They didn't bounce back and say, no, this is what we're doing. They kind of just were like, oh, maybe they're right. Now they've gotten the ship steadied a little bit. They are now a mid-tier SEC team, feels solidly in the NCAA tournament, right around where I have Auburn in the mix right now. Maybe a little bit above right now, just based off of recent results. But I think that they needed a high-level point guard. I think Jalen Lowe can be that when healthy. Now, he hasn't been healthy at any point during this year. He's been in the lineup, out of the lineup, and that will kill you. Particularly with it being a point guard, because it's kind of like having a quarterback. Like, you're playing the game based off of how he views it. If he's a point guard who likes to see back cuts down the baseline and will hit you on a bounce pass, well, you understand that. You're going to move that way. If he's a point guard who wants you to space the floor, get a paint touch, and then get it to you on the three-point line, well, you understand where you need to be there. If you aren't playing with this guy consistently, he's in the lineup, out of the lineup, and Denzel Aberdeen is not a similar style of point guard. Completely different. Like I said, he's more of a combo guard, really. Well, it's going to be tough for you to remember, okay, he's back in the game. How do I need to play again? Oh, but he's also not fully healthy, so he can't even do some of the things he wants to be doing. It's tough. Same thing at the center position. You're rolling through different centers who do different things. Jaden Quaintance is not only that, but also a player who is still developing. Last year, yes, he was a freshman in college basketball, was not eligible for the NBA draft. He was too young. He was supposed to be a senior in high school. He reclassed up, played at Arizona State, then suffers an injury, loses an entire offseason, really, of development, of reps, and then gets inserted into the lineup midway through the year on a team that needed center production, but he goes out there and he hasn't played with these guys before. He's figuring out, okay, what does Denzel Aberdeen want from me? When I come up, how does he want that screen set? Does he want me to dive back to the rim? Does he want me to kind of linger? Does he want me to loop out? There's all kinds of ins and outs. What angle does he want that screen set is a big one. And there was a lot of pressure put on Quaintance as well because Garrison was not playing well. And so now suddenly this Kentucky team for a little while had no rotation. I mean, it was legitimately just pick somebody up off the bench and put them in the game. It felt like they were scrambling every time that there needed to be a substitution made. consistency, even with the lesser talented players, is always going to provide you a slightly better result. These guys who have been playing together the entire offseason, the early portion of the season, they've been there at every practice, they've worked together. Even if they're not quite as talented, even if they're not quite as good right now, they're going to produce some better results oftentimes. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of with this Kentucky team. And so it's going to be interesting. Do you keep trying to work in different guys? I think to some degree you have to. Obviously, Jalen Lowe's out now. You've eliminated that one. But I think that the ceiling that some of these players provide you, if they can get healthy, if they can get in the rotation, is just too high and too valuable to what you want to be, what you kind of built yourself out to be. I don't think you can completely just kind of go away from it. So, how do you balance it? That's going to be Mark Pope's big issue that he has to resolve throughout the month of February. Interested to see how he does that in the coming weeks. Let's get you out of here with the games of the week. It's an interesting week in the world of college basketball. I'm going to warn you now, we're going to go heavy on the Big Ten. Just did a whole segment talking about them, and we're going to back that up by watching them this week and learning more about where they all stand. But tonight, on Thursday night, really light slate for college basketball. We're going to watch Montana State versus Idaho State. Montana State is in the bracket. The Big Sky has been an interesting one. We've seen Montana State, we've seen Montana, we've seen Portland State, we've seen Northern Colorado, all of them in the mix for that automatic bid. Idaho State has a decent record as well, so we'll tune in, we'll watch that one, we'll see if Montana State can establish themselves atop that conference. On Friday, we've got Michigan against Ohio State, a good old-fashioned rivalry there. Kind of got its standalone slate on Friday before we get into Saturday's action, where our game of the day will be Purdue against Illinois, two powerhouses in the Big Ten. Illinois riding a big win streak right now. Can they emerge into the top two seeds of bracketology? How about Purdue? Can they bounce back from a kind of confusing loss against UCLA? Really could use a bounce back effort. Get another big win, put themselves back in the mix. They were right on the verge of becoming a 1 seed in bracketology. That doesn't pan out. Now they're back on the 2 seed line and trying to keep themselves from a fall all the way to the 3 seed line. On Sunday, we've got Wisconsin against USC. And again, Sunday's pretty light slate generally across college basketball, but we do get Wisconsin against USC, two bubble teams from the Big Ten. These are going to be some of the important ones. One of these teams is going to really establish themselves, probably end up on the right side of the bubble. One of them could end up in that last four in conversation or falling to the wrong side of the bubble, even depending on the results around them. On Monday, we've got to go with BYU against Arizona. That's the only place we could go really here. We've talked about in recent weeks Arizona, who is undefeated. This is one of the big opportunities for them to take their first loss against a BYU team in their arena. So you've got to travel and face one of the best teams in the Big 12. They've got two of the best players in the Big 12. AJ DeBonsa, of course, the star freshman, Richie Saunders on the wing as well. We'll see how that one pans out. On Tuesday, we've got Michigan against Nebraska. We try really hard not to have the same team twice, but this Michigan team, A, is incredible, and B, they're playing Nebraska. I mean, this is where, again, when we looked at those schedules, we said, all right, where does Nebraska most likely take its first loss? This was the spot again. On the road against Michigan. Really tough matchup here. This is also the opportunity, side note, if you're Nebraska and you want to be in the 1 seed conversation, they're up into the 2 seed realm now. If you want to be a 1 seed, win this game, and I can guarantee you, you're going to at least draw a long look on that 1 seed line in the next bracketology update. We round things out next Wednesday. We're going Auburn against Texas, two bubble teams from the SEC. Auburn currently in the field on the right side of things. Texas on the wrong side of things right now. Still outside looking in, but have picked up some good wins recently that have kept them in the mix. taken some losses also now since then that have kind of stunted that run towards the right side. I'm James Fletcher. This has been Three True Values. Thank you once again for tuning in. Please continue to like, share, subscribe, whatever it is you do to get this to more people, get this to your friends who follow college basketball. We're getting closer and closer to the real important months of college basketball where we're going to be breaking down bracketology each week. We're going to be talking in depth about the top NBA draft prospects each and every week. So you're not going to want to miss it right here. Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher. We'll be back with you Tuesday with more recruiting updates.